The emergency lights flashed red across the council chamber. Wisdom Keeper stood before the gathered representatives of 15 star nations, her crystalline body refracting the warning signals into 1,000 crimson shards. For 10,000 cycles, her people had guarded the ancient prophecy. Now, as 3-star systems went dark in the outer rim, the time had finally come. "The Devourer stirs," she announced, her voice like wind chimes in a storm. "The prophecy says that when darkness returns, saviors will emerge from an unknown world. They will be touched by struggle, forged in endless conflict but pure in their purpose to protect others." The council members shifted nervously. Some had dismissed the prophecy as myth. Others had hoped it would never be needed. But now, with billions of lives already lost and the enemy advancing toward the core worlds, they had no choice but to believe. Far across the galaxy, on a small blue planet orbiting an average star, Commander Wu sat in his quarters aboard the orbital defense station. He was reviewing supply manifests when the communication alert sounded. His science officer, one, appeared on the screen, her face pale with shock. "Commander, you need to see this. We've received a transmission. It's not from any Earth government or colony." Wu joined her in the communications bay within minutes. The message played on loop, translated into Korean, English, Mandarin, and every major Earth language simultaneously. The voice was strange, musical yet urgent. It spoke of worlds dying, civilizations falling, and a desperate plea for help from anyone who could hear it. "This has to be a hoax," Wu said, but his voice lacked conviction. The mathematical precision of the star charts included in the transmission was beyond anything Earth's best scientists could fabricate. One shook her head. "I've analyzed the signal source. It came from a point in space 300 light-years away. The quantum signature is unlike anything in our databases. Sir, I think this is real. I think we're being contacted by aliens." The next 72 hours passed in a blur. Earth's military and political leaders engaged in heated debates. Some called it an elaborate trap. Others insisted humanity had no business involving itself in alien conflicts. But a smaller, more determined group argued that if the message was real, if civilizations were dying, then Earth had a moral obligation to respond. Wu found himself at the center of these discussions. At 42 years old, he had fought in the Martian conflicts and commanded successful operations in the Belt Wars. He knew combat, knew sacrifice, and knew that sometimes the right choice was also the hardest one. "We send an expeditionary force," he told the assembled generals and politicians. 12 ships, enough to make a difference if this is real, not so many that we leave Earth defenseless if it's a trap. We go, we assess, and we act according to what we find." After intense debate, they agreed. Wu assembled his fleet carefully. The flagship would be the Indomitable, a heavy cruiser equipped with rail guns and missile batteries. He selected officers he trusted, a tactical genius who had planned the successful defense of Titan Station, Sora, a medical officer who had pioneered trauma protocols during the worst days of the Belt Wars, and young Min, a pilot whose reflexes and instincts were legendary among the fighter corps. The journey took 3 weeks at maximum drive. When they finally emerged near the coordinates provided in the transmission, Wu's breath caught in his throat. 200 ships floated in formation around a massive that dwarfed anything humanity had ever constructed. The vessels represented designs beyond Earth's engineering capabilities. Some appeared to be grown rather than built, organic curves gleaming in the light of a distant star. Others seemed carved from pure crystal, refracting light into impossible patterns. Still others phased in and out of normal space, their outlines flickering like digital ghosts. "They're hailing us," one reported, her voice tight with barely controlled excitement and fear. The face that appeared on there was nothing like the aliens from Earth's old movies. Wisdom Keeper looked like a living sculpture of smoky quartz, with multiple eyes arranged in a cluster above a mouth that moved in ways that suggested a very different vocal anatomy. "Welcome, warriors of Earth," she said, the translation software rendering her words in Korean. "The wise ones knew that saviors would come. We did not expect them to arrive in such modest vessels." Wu bristled at the implied criticism but kept his voice diplomatic. "We came as quickly as we could. What exactly are we facing?" Over the next hour explained. The Devourer was an ancient enemy, sleeping beyond the galactic rim for millions of years. No one knew its origins or true purpose. It simply consumed. Entire civilizations vanished, their worlds stripped of all life and resources. The galaxy's greatest military minds had studied the pattern of attacks and concluded that the Devourer was heading toward the core worlds, where the densest populations lived. Wu toured the Allied fleet with a growing sense of inadequacy. They showed him weapons that could unmake matter itself. The demonstrated bioships that could repair themselves in combat. The Dominion's phase warpers could strike from multiple dimensions simultaneously. Compared to such marvels, Earth's kinetic weapons and nuclear warheads seemed like stone axes beside laser cutters. He met the Supreme Commander of the Allied forces, a general named. The alien's face was covered in armor-like scales, and his eyes held nothing but disdain as he regarded the human officer. "Your participation is noted and appreciated," said in a tone that suggested neither note nor appreciation. "However, given your technological limitations, I'm assigning your vessels to support duties in the rear of the formation. You'll assist with evacuations and supply runs." "My people came here to fight," Wu protested. "Your people came here to die uselessly if I allow you anywhere near the enemy," replied coldly. "Be grateful I'm finding any role for your primitive ships at all." That night, unable to sleep, Wu found himself in the observation deck of the Indomitable. Wisdom Keeper appeared beside him, moving silently despite her crystalline form. "You are troubled," she observed. "We came to help. Instead, we're being treated like children." Multiple eyes focused on him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. The prophecy spoke of saviors who would seem weak at first. It said they would possess something the galaxy had forgotten, though what that might be was never clear. "Perhaps we will learn together, Commander Wu of Earth." She left him alone with his thoughts and the view of the Allied fleet, preparing for a war unlike anything humanity had ever known. The system was home to 6 billion, a peaceful species that had contributed more to galactic art and philosophy than to military science. Their orbital habitats gleamed like pearls around there, delicate and beautiful and utterly defenseless. Intelligence reports confirmed that the Devourer's vanguard would strike here next. The Allied fleet took up defensive positions around Prime. The massive dreadnoughts formed the first line, their null cannons powered and ready. Behind them, the bioships clustered protectively near there. The phase warpers positioned themselves at strategic points around the system, ready to strike from multiple angles. And far in the rear, relegated to observer status, the 12 human ships waited. Studied the formation from the Indomitable's tactical station, his jaw tight with frustration. "This is wrong," he muttered to Wu. "They're too spread out. If the enemy concentrates their forces on one point, the fleet won't be able to respond quickly enough." "Tell that too," Wu replied bitterly. He made it clear he's not interested in primitive human tactics. The enemy arrived without warning. One moment, the sensors showed empty space. The next, reality seemed to tear open, and through the wounds poured ships that looked like frozen pieces of the void itself. They were massive, irregular shapes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Around them swarmed thousands of smaller craft, fighter-sized constructs that moved with unnatural precision. The Allied fleet opened fire immediately. Energy beams lanced through space, brilliant streams of destructive power that should have vaporized any target. The quantum torpedoes released by the warpers could unmake the molecular bonds of any known material. The null cannons fired pulses that literally deleted matter from existence. Nothing worked. The energy beam struck the void ships and simply disappeared, absorbed into their impossible surfaces. The quantum torpedoes passed through them as if they weren't there. Even the null cannons, the most powerful weapons in the galactic arsenal, had no visible effect. The Devourer's forces advanced through the barrage without slowing. Then they returned fire. The fighter constructs phased through the Allied ship's shields as if the protective fields didn't exist. They attached to hulls and began tearing them apart at the molecular level. Entire sections of ships simply dissolved into clouds of their component atoms. The void ships fired weapons that weren't really weapons at all, but tears in space itself. Wherever these tears touched, matter ceased to exist. Wu watched in horror as the fleet began to die. A dreadnought, 3 kilometers long and armed with enough firepower to crack a planet, came apart like wet paper. Bioships screamed across all frequencies as they were consumed. Phase warpers tried to retreat into alternate dimensions, only to find the Devourer's forces waiting for them there too. In 2 hours, 40 ships were destroyed. The orbital habitats around Prime began to burn. His face appeared on every ship, his scales pale with shock. All vessels full retreat, fall back to rally point 7, repeat full retreat. But the Devourer's ships were faster. Their void drives moved them through space in ways that physics. They would overtake the fleeing fleet within the hour, and once the Allied forces were destroyed, nothing would stand between the enemy and Prime's 6 billion inhabitants. Wu made his decision in the span of a heartbeat. All human vessels break formation, attack pattern random 7, engage the enemy directly. His head snapped up from his console. Sir, that's suicide. Our weapons won't work any better than theirs did. Maybe, but we won't know unless we try. 1. Broadcast our attack plan to the rest of the fleet. Let them know what we're doing. Sora, prepare the medical bay for mass casualties. Medical Officer Sora nodded grimly and left the bridge. In the medical bay, she checked her supplies one more time, then sat down and closed her eyes briefly. She had seen enough war to know what was coming. The only question was how many of her crew would survive the next hour. Mint's voice crackled over the fighter squadron channel. All pilots, this is lead. Follow my mark and try to keep up. We're going to show these things what crazy looks like. Her fighter shot forward, followed by 60 others from the human fleet. They didn't fly in the careful formations the aliens used. Instead, they scattered like a school of fish, each pilot choosing their own vector, their own target, their own insane approach. They dove at the enemy fighter constructs with reckless speed, firing as they came. The difference was immediate and shocking. The human rail guns, primitive kinetic weapons that simply threw chunks of metal very fast, punched through the construct's defenses. The tactical nuclear warheads, crude explosive devices that every civilized species had abandoned centuries ago, detonated among the enemy swarms and actually destroyed them. The Indomitable charged directly at a void ship, and Wu knew they had perhaps 30 seconds before that thing's weapons tore them apart. All forward batteries fire at will. Give them everything we have. Tungsten rounds accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed slammed into the void ship's hull. Chemical high explosives followed, then missiles tipped with old-fashioned fission warheads. The void ship's surface rippled like disturbed water. A section of its hull actually cracked, revealing something like circuitry underneath, but organic and pulsing with sickly light. Ramming speed, Wu ordered. The Indomitable's reinforced bow struck the void ship at full thrust. The impact threw everyone forward against their restraints. Alarms screamed as hull breaches opened across multiple decks. But the void ship reeled backward, its damaged section spreading like a wound. Across the battlefield, the other human ships pressed their desperate attack. The destroyer Soul rammed a cluster of fighter constructs, destroying them and itself in a massive explosion. The frigate positioned itself between a void ship and a damaged dreadnought, taking fire meant for the alien vessel and buying it time to escape. The aliens watched in disbelief as the primitive human forces actually hurt the enemy. The Devourer's constructs, evolved to fight the galaxy's advanced civilizations, had no defense against weapons so crude they might as well have been clubs and spears. And the human pilots, flying with wild improvisation instead of algorithmic precision, were impossible for the enemy to predict. His voice cut through the command channel. All vessels, return to the fight. Target the wounds the humans have opened. Concentrate fire on damaged enemy ships. The Allied fleet turned around and charged back into battle. This time, they knew where to aim. The null cannons fired at the cracks in the void ship's hulls. The quantum torpedoes passed through solid matter but exploded inside those wounds. The phase warpers struck at damaged constructs, finding that their weapons finally had an effect. The battle raged for another hour. Min's fighter took a hit that sheared off her left wing, and she ejected into space, watching her squadron continue the fight without her. Sora performed emergency surgery on a pilot who had been pulled from his wrecked fighter, working by flashlight when the medical bay lost power. Coordinated the fleet's movements even as the Indomitable's bridge filled with smoke from burning consoles. When the Devourer's vanguard finally, retreating back through their dimensional tiers, the cost was clear. 3 human ships completely destroyed, 8 others so badly damaged they could barely limp away under their own power, 2,000 human crew dead or wounded. But Prime still stood, 6 billion still lived, and for the first time in this war the enemy had been driven back. Wu sat in his command chair, surrounded by the sparking ruins of his bridge, and listened to the Allied fleet's communications. They were talking about the humans now, about their weapons, their tactics, their insane courage. Wisdom Keeper's voice came through on a private channel. "Perhaps now we understand what the prophecy meant," she said softly. "The saviors would possess something we had forgotten. You remember how to fight for survival, not victory. You remember how to sacrifice for others. And you remember that sometimes the old ways work better than the new ones." Wu looked at the casualty reports scrolling across his cracked display, and wondered if remembering such things was a blessing or a curse. They served as the Allied fleet's mobile headquarters, a vessel so large it had its own artificial gravity and ecosystems. Commander Wu limped through its crystalline corridors, his left leg still healing from the injuries he'd sustained when the Indomitable nearly tore apart. Around him, representatives from 15 species hurried between meetings, and he noticed something new in how they looked at him. The dismissive glances were gone, replaced by curiosity and something that might have been respect. The council chamber had changed too. Instead of relegating the human contingent to the back of the room, the council members now positioned Wu near the center, next to General. The commander's attitude had shifted dramatically since the battle at Prime. He no longer spoke to Wu with contempt, but with the cautious interest of a professional warrior encountering something unexpected. "Explain your tactical philosophy," said without preamble. "Your pilots fly in patterns that violate every principle of efficient combat. Your ships charge directly into enemy fire rather than maintaining optimal engagement distance. By all mathematical models, your forces should have been annihilated. Yet you survived and achieved what our superior technology could not." Wu thought carefully before answering. "We don't fight by mathematical models. We fight by instinct and adaptation. Every pilot makes their own decisions based on what they see in front of them. Every captain has the authority to ignore orders if the situation demands it. We call it improvisation." "Chaos," one of the representatives interjected. "You describe chaos as if it were a virtue." "Controlled chaos," spoke up from where he stood beside Wu. "The enemy can't predict what we'll do if we don't know ourselves until the moment comes. And more importantly, we've learned something humans discovered through countless wars, The enemy gets a vote. No battle plan survives first contact with reality. Across the fleet, similar conversations were happening. Medical Chief Sora found herself in the medical complex, surrounded by alien doctors who wanted to understand her methods. The galaxy's medical science was centuries ahead of Earth's in pure technology. They could regenerate organs, repair genetic damage, and cure diseases that would baffle human medicine. But Sora had something they lacked. Battlefield triage, she explained to a group of physicians. When you have 50 wounded and only resources to save 20, you need to make choices. Not the easiest choices or the most comfortable ones, but the choices that save the most lives. You look at a patient and you assess in 3 seconds whether they'll survive with minimal intervention, whether they need immediate help, or whether they're beyond saving. One of the doctors, a being whose name translated roughly as healer, recoiled. Beyond saving, we would never abandon a patient. Then you'd lose 50 patients trying to save one, Sora replied bluntly. I've been in medical bays with power failing, supplies running out, and more wounded arriving every minute. Kindness isn't enough. You need ruthless efficiency combined with the skill to know who you can actually save. Let me show you. She began teaching them human trauma protocols, adapted for alien physiology. How to stabilize a patient in 30 seconds, how to perform surgery with improvised tools when proper equipment wasn't available, how to keep working when exhaustion threatened to shut you down. The alien doctors were brilliant, but they'd never had to work under such brutal constraints. Sora had learned in the Belt Wars that sometimes medicine was as much about determination as knowledge. In the fighter bay, Min stood before a group of 30 pilots from 6 different species. She had been rescued from her ejection pod by a pilot named, who had volunteered to learn human combat techniques. Now he and the others watched as she tried to explain concepts that seemed obvious to her but baffling to them. You're all flying like computers, she said, gesturing at the simulation results displayed on the wall. Perfect formation, optimal trajectories, maximum efficiency. The problem is that perfect flying is predictable flying. Watch this. She took control of a simulator and flew a combat run against AI opponents. Her fighter twisted through 3-dimensional space in ways that made the alien pilots wince. She dove when doctrine said to climb, rolled sideways when she should have fired, and broke formation at moments that seemed completely random. Yet she destroyed 4 enemy constructs without taking a single hit. Your flying makes no mathematical sense, observed, his scaled face showing confusion. Multiple times you placed yourself in tactically inferior positions. I followed my gut, Min explained. Humans have instincts, hunches, feelings about what's going to happen next. We can't always explain why we do something, but we learn to trust those instincts. You're all so focused on what your computers tell you that you ignore what your own senses are saying. She spent the next week teaching them to break their formations, to trust their reactions, to embrace uncertainty. Some struggled more than others, though with their rigid military culture, found it nearly impossible to disobey tactical algorithms. The peaceful by nature couldn't shake their reluctance to take aggressive risks, but a few others began to understand. Their flying became less precise but more effective, more adaptable. Worked with the Council's Strategic Planning Committee in a massive operations center filled with holographic displays and quantum computers capable of simulating billions of battle scenarios. The alien strategists showed him their plan for the next major engagement, a carefully calculated defense that maximized their advantages while minimizing risk. It won't work, said flatly. The chief strategist, a named computational, tilted their crystalline head. The simulations show a 73% probability of success. The simulations assume the enemy will behave according to predictable patterns. What if they don't? What if they adapt? What if they do something your computers never considered? Pulled up his own tactical display. In human military history, we have a concept called friction. It's all the things that go wrong in war that you can't predict. Equipment fails, Intelligence is wrong. Commanders misunderstand orders. Weather changes. And most importantly, the enemy does things you don't expect because they're trying to survive just like you are. He spent hours teaching them about flexibility and redundancy, about backup plans and contingencies, about the importance of commander's intent over rigid instructions. General listened carefully and eventually became strongest advocate, recognizing that the human approach filled a critical gap in galactic military thinking. Meanwhile, human engineers worked with alien scientists to study fragments of destroyed void ships that had been recovered from the battlefield. The materials were unlike anything in known science, but Sora noticed something during one of her rare breaks from the medical bay. "It's organic," she said, examining the cellular structure under a microscope. "Not completely, but partially. These ships aren't just machines. They're grown, cultivated, alive in some way." The discovery led to a breakthrough. If the void ships were partially organic, they might respond to biological attacks. And if they could combine human kinetic weapons with alien quantum technology and biological agents, they might create something truly deadly to the Devourer's forces. One night, Wu found himself again in the observation deck, watching repair crews work on the damaged ships. Wisdom Keeper joined him, as she often did these days. "You're troubled," she observed. "I'm wondering what we've become," Wu admitted. "The galaxy is learning to fight like humans. Is that really what you need? We've spent our entire history killing each other. We're good at war because we've never stopped practicing. Is that the salvation your prophecy promised?" Multiple eyes focused on him with that same intense gaze. The prophecy spoke of beings from a world of endless conflict, but it also said they would be pure in their purpose to protect others. "You fight not because you love war, Commander, but because you understand its cost and choose to bear it anyway. That is what makes you saviors." She reached out and touched his hand with one crystalline finger. "The final fragment of the prophecy, hidden even from me until recently, speaks of this doubt you feel. It says the true saviors would be those who questioned whether they should be saviors at all, those who understood that teaching others to fight meant teaching them to suffer." Wu looked out at the fleet, at the ships from 15 worlds learning to fight and bleed together. "Then I hope we're teaching them the right lessons." "You are teaching them to survive," replied. "In the face of extinction, there is no higher lesson than that." The Devourer's main fleet emerged from the void like a plague of darkness. Intelligence reports counted over 5,000 vessels, each one larger and more terrible than those they had faced at Prime. They moved in a coordinated mass toward the galactic core, where the densest concentrations of civilized worlds waited, unaware of the extinction bearing down on them. The Allied Council met in emergency session. The alien commanders wanted to gather all forces at the core and make one decisive stand. Their logic was sound by every mathematical model. Concentrate strength, defend the most valuable targets, win or die in a single decisive battle. Wu argued against this with every fiber of his being. One decisive battle means one decisive defeat if we lose. We can't afford to stake everything on a single engagement. The enemy is too strong, too numerous. We need a different strategy. "Then what do you propose?" asked. The general had come to respect human tactical thinking, but even he looked skeptical. "A fighting retreat," answered, displaying a tactical map that showed 12 star systems between the enemy's position and the core worlds. "We fall back across these systems, one at a time. At each world we make a stand, bloody the enemy, learn from the engagement, and evacuate the civilian population before retreating to the next position. We trade space for time, and we make them pay for every light year with their ships and their momentum." The representative spoke up, their voice filled with distress. "You ask us to abandon our colonies, to yield entire systems without even attempting to hold them." "I ask you to save your people," Wu replied. "Every system we defend means millions of civilians evacuated to safety. Every battle we fight means we learn more about the enemy and they lose more of their forces. By the time they reach the core, they'll be weakened and we'll know exactly how to hurt them. The debate raged for hours, but eventually the council agreed. The alternative was unthinkable. If they made their stand at the core and lost, trillions would die with no hope of evacuation or escape. The first stand was at a mining system whose extraction facilities fed the industrial capacity of 3 neighboring star nations. 8 billion worked in the orbital refineries and surface installations. Commander Wu took personal command of the defensive fleet, while massive transport ships began the evacuation of the civilian population. The Devourer's forces arrived in overwhelming numbers. 2,000 void ships and countless fighter constructs dropped out of dimensional transit and began their assault. The Allied fleet, now numbering 300 vessels thanks to reinforcements from the core worlds, met them in the outer system. This time, the fleet was ready. The aliens had adopted human weapons technology, and their ships bristled with rail guns and missile batteries alongside their energy weapons. The dreadnoughts carried what the humans called kinetic kill vehicles, tungsten rods that could be accelerated to devastating speeds. The bioships had been retrofitted with chemical explosive dispensers. Even the phase warpers now carried crude nuclear warheads. But the Devourer had adapted too. Their void ships deployed countermeasures against solid projectiles, fields that slowed or deflected kinetic rounds. Their fighter constructs moved in less predictable patterns, having somehow learned from their encounters with human pilots. The battle was brutal. Min led her fighter wing in a desperate assault on the enemy's forward elements. She had 60 pilots now, a mix of human and alien, all flying with the chaotic improvisation she had taught them. Flew on her wing, his fighter twisting through space with an abandon that would have horrified his former instructors. "Break and scatter," Min ordered. "Pick your targets and trust your instincts. Make them chase you through the debris fields." The dogfight that followed description. Fighters wove between the hulking capital ships, exploiting every asteroid and piece of wreckage for cover. The enemy constructs tried to follow their algorithmic targeting patterns, but the human-trained pilots were everywhere and nowhere, striking from unexpected angles and vanishing before the return fire could find them. Aboard the Indomitable, coordinated the fleet's movements with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. He didn't rely on the quantum computer's battle simulations. Instead, he watched the enemy's behavior and predicted their moves based on understanding rather than calculation. When a group of void ships tried to flank the Allied line, he had 3 destroyers waiting in ambush. When the enemy tried to concentrate their forces for a breakthrough, he had the fleet scatter and reform, turning the enemy's strength into a disadvantage. "They're fighting like predators," he explained to the tactical officers who worked alongside him. "Predators follow patterns. They try to isolate prey, drive them into kill zones, use overwhelming force to ensure quick kills. If you understand those patterns, you can turn them against the predator." In the medical bay, Sora worked miracles. The Indomitable sickbay was designed for a crew of 500, but she had over 800 wounded packed into every available space. Her alien students had learned well, and now a surgeon worked beside her, making the ruthless triage decisions that saved lives. A medic performed emergency surgery in a supply closet, using techniques Sora had taught them for working in impossible conditions. The battle raged for 3 days. The void ships pressed their attack relentlessly, and the Allied fleet gave ground slowly, making the enemy pay for every kilometer. Human ships charged into breaches, ramming enemy vessels when their weapons ran dry. Alien crews displayed courage that their ancestors wouldn't have recognized, holding positions that tactical computers said were indefensible. On the 3rd day, with half the fleet damaged and the evacuation nearly complete, Wu gave the order to retreat. The Allied ships in good order, their rear guard savaging the enemy forces that tried to pursue. Behind them, installations burned, but 8 billion had been evacuated to safety. The Devourer had paid dearly. Hundreds of their vessels destroyed, thousands of constructs reduced to scrap, but they kept coming. The fleet fell back to the system. Then. At each world they made their stand, evacuated the civilians, and before the enemy's superior numbers could overwhelm them. At each battle they learned more. Sora's medical team saved thousands who would have died in earlier engagements. Mint's pilots achieved kill ratios that seemed impossible, with becoming one of the most effective among them. Tactical innovations became standard doctrine across the Allied fleet. But the cost was staggering. 30,000 crew members dead, 47 ships destroyed completely, and of the 12 human vessels that had first arrived at the rally point, only 6 remained. Earth sent reinforcements, but they were weeks away from the front lines. The defense of Prime would be the critical battle. The planet housed the Grand Archives, repositories of galactic history spanning 2 million years. The Devourer wanted those archives destroyed, wanted to erase the galaxy's memory of itself. They threw 3,000 ships at the world, determined to break through regardless of losses. Wu had only 200 vessels, exhausted and damaged from weeks of continuous combat. By every rational calculation, they should retreat immediately and save the fleet for the defense of the core worlds. But Prime was worth fighting for, worth dying for, and the commander knew that some battles had to be fought not because you could win, but because you couldn't bear to run. "All ships," he broadcast across the fleet. "We hold this line for Prime, for the archives, for everyone who's depending on us. We hold." The battle that followed would be studied for generations. The Allied fleet fought with everything they had learned, every tactic and strategy and desperate innovation. They improvised, adapted, and survived moment by moment. Mint's fighter was shot down again, but pulled her from the wreckage, and they continued fighting in his damaged craft. Sora performed surgery in a medical bay with no gravity, the ship's generators having failed, operating by the light of emergency glow sticks. Coordinated a fighting retreat that turned into a trap, luring 1,000 void ships into a debris field that the humans had seeded with nuclear mines. The detonations turned that section of space into a hell of radiation and shrapnel. The enemy forces reeled, and in that moment of chaos, the Allied fleet struck back with everything they had. The tide began to turn. The void ships, facing coordinated attacks from weapons they couldn't fully counter and tactics they couldn't predict, started to fall back. Their fighter constructs, programmed for algorithmic warfare, couldn't handle the wild improvisation of human-trained pilots. When the Devourer's fleet finally, they had lost over half their forces. Prime stood intact, its archives preserved. The Allied fleet, though battered, had won their most important victory yet. In the command center of the Indomitable, with sparks still raining from damaged ceiling panels and the smell of smoke thick in the air, Wu received a transmission from Earth. Reinforcements had arrived. 60 ships, carrying fresh crews and weapons, ready to join the fight. The final battle was coming, and for the first time since this war began, Wu allowed himself to believe they might actually survive it. The threshold was a stellar phenomenon unlike anything in Earth's astronomy, a massive gravitational distortion where 3 ancient stars had collided and merged millions of years ago. The resulting spacetime anomaly marked the boundary between the outer galaxy and the dense core worlds, where most of the Council races made their homes. Beyond it lay trillions of lives, the heart of galactic civilization. The Devourer's remaining forces, still numbering in the thousands despite their losses, massed on one side of the threshold. The Allied armada, reinforced and reorganized, waited on the other. Commander Wu stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, which had been repaired and upgraded with the best technology the galaxy could provide. Around his flagship gathered 400 vessels, the largest concentration of military power the galaxy had assembled in 10,000 years. Human ships fought alongside dreadnoughts, bioships, and phase warpers. The crews were mixed now too. Alien officers served on human vessels, learning human tactics firsthand. Human pilots flew in alien squadrons, teaching improvisation and instinct. "Open a fleet-wide channel," Wu ordered one. When she nodded, he began to speak, and his words were translated into 15 languages simultaneously. "We have come a long way together. Some of us traveled across the galaxy to answer a call for help. Others defended their homes and families. We come from different worlds, different species, different ways of thinking. But we've learned to fight together, bleed together, and survive together. The wise ones knew that saviors would come. They came not from one species, but from all of us united by a common purpose. Today we end this. For every world that's fallen. For everyone we've lost. For the future, we hold this line." Across the fleet, crews prepared for battle. Min sat in her fighter, part of a wing that included pilots from 6 species. Occupied the craft beside hers, his fighter modified with human weapons and flying systems. They had flown together through 8 major battles now, and she trusted him as much as any human pilot she'd ever known. "Stay close to me," she told him over the squadron channel. "When things get crazy, and they will get crazy, just follow your instincts like I taught you." "I will honor your training," replied, and she could hear the determination in his voice. In the Indomitable's medical bay, Sora ran final checks on her supplies and her team. She had 200 medical personnel now, a mix of human and alien doctors who had learned battlefield medicine under her brutal but effective instruction. They had portable equipment positioned throughout the ship and on neighboring vessels. Whatever happened in the next few hours, they would be ready. Coordinated with tactical officers across the fleet from his station. The battle plan they had developed over the past week was complex but flexible, full of contingencies and backup options. It assumed nothing would go according to plan and prepared for everything to go wrong. That was the human way of war, and the aliens had learned to appreciate it. The Devourer's forces struck first. They came through the threshold in a massive wave, thousands of void ships and fighter constructs filling space with their dark presence. The Allied fleet opened fire with everything they had. Energy weapons combined with kinetic rounds. Quantum torpedoes exploded inside wounds opened by railgun fire. The new bioweapon that Sora had helped develop, tailored to attack the organic components of the void ships, spread through the enemy formation like a plague. The battle that followed was the largest in galactic history. Ships clashed across millions of cubic kilometers, weapons fire creating patterns of destruction that would be visible from nearby star systems. The void ships tried their dimensional weapons, tearing holes in space itself, but the Allied fleet had learned to detect and avoid these attacks. The fighter constructs swarmed in their millions, but they met human-trained pilots who fought with chaotic unpredictability and alien pilots who had learned to trust their instincts over their computers. Min led her wing in a desperate assault on one of the Devourer's command ships, a void ship twice the size of any other, coordinates all enemy forces in its sector. They dove through a hurricane of fire, losing fighters with every second, but never wavering. His craft took a hit that sheared off his engines, and he began tumbling helplessly toward the enemy capital ship. "Eject," Min screamed, but had another idea. "My trajectory will take me into their hull breach," he transmitted calmly. "If I can reach it, my ship's reactor will overload inside their vessel. It might be enough." "Don't you dare," Min said, but she knew that tone. She had heard it before in human pilots who had made their final decision. "You taught me to trust my instincts," replied. "This feels right. Honor my sacrifice by winning this war, Min of Earth." His fighter disappeared into the breach in the void ship's hull. 3 seconds later, a massive explosion tore through the enemy vessel from the inside. The command ship began to break apart, its control over nearby forces failing. The sector descended into chaos. Aboard the Indomitable, alarms blared as 3 command-class void ships focused their attention on the human flagship. Wu knew immediately that his ship couldn't survive such concentrated firepower. But if they could hold the enemy's attention for even a minute, the fleet could destroy the Devourer's coordination center on the other side of the battlefield. "All crew evacuate to escape pods," he ordered. "Sir, we're not leaving you," said, his hand on his sidearm as if he might need to physically force his commander off the bridge. "That's an order, Lieutenant." "With respect, Commander, no." One stood beside, and around the bridge the rest of the crew moved to their stations with determined expressions. "We're staying, all of us. This is our ship and you're our captain." Wu felt something break inside him, but it wasn't weakness. It was the same fierce pride he'd felt watching human pilots die to save alien worlds. "Then make sure our last stand counts for something. All weapons, continuous fire. Communications, broadcast our position to the fleet. Let them know we're buying them time." The Indomitable blazed with weapons fire, every gun, every launcher, every last round pouring into the advancing void ships. The enemy vessels closed in for the kill, their dimensional weapons charging for the shots that would unmake the human flagship. Then the entire Allied fleet converged on their position. General's command ship, a super dreadnought, took a dimensional tier meant for the Indomitable. The weapon split the alien vessel in half, but its last order had been to ram the nearest void ship. The collision destroyed both vessels in a fireball visible across the battlefield. A wing of bioships, led by Healer who had learned battlefield medicine from Sora, formed a living shield around the Indomitable. They absorbed fire that would have killed the human ship, sacrificing themselves to protect their teachers and friends. Min and what remained of her squadron, grief and rage giving them impossible speed, destroyed the Devourer's coordination center. The enemy forces, suddenly without central direction, began to falter. Across the battlefield, the story repeated itself. Alien crews sacrificed their ships to save human vessels. Human captains rammed enemy forces to buy their alien comrades time to escape. Species that had barely known each other months ago died for each other without hesitation. In the medical bay, Sora worked on a wounded pilot with the same desperate intensity she had brought to saving human lives. Around her, her team performed miracles, keeping people alive through sheer determination and skill learned in the crucible of war. The Devourer's forces broke. Without coordination, facing an enemy that fought with unity they couldn't comprehend and tactics they couldn't counter, they scattered. The void ships fled back through dimensional portals. The fighter constructs died in their thousands, their programming unable to handle retreat. When the last enemy vessel disappeared, the Allied fleet remained, battered and bleeding but victorious. Over 100 ships destroyed, 50,000 dead, including General, Healer, and countless others who had become brothers and sisters in this terrible war. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Wu collapsed into his command chair, overwhelmed by exhaustion and grief and relief. Wisdom Keeper's hologram appeared before him. "The prophecy is complete," she said softly. "The saviors came, not to conquer or rule, but to remind us what we had forgotten. That peace is not the absence of war, but the willingness to stand together against the darkness. That strength comes not from technology or numbers, but from the bonds between those who fight side by side." In the days that followed, the galaxy began to heal. The Galactic Council officially welcomed humanity as full members, not as primitive newcomers, but as the teachers who had saved civilization. Earth's military academies opened their doors to alien officers. Human doctors like Sora served in hospitals across the stars. The Memorial Fleet, decommissioned vessels from every species, was established in orbit around a reminder of the cost of war and the value of peace. Min returned to Earth briefly for some memorial service, which was attended by pilots from across the galaxy. She accepted a position at the new Galactic Flight Academy, where her first lesson to every new class was always the same. Break the rules when you have to. Trust your instincts, but never forget you're fighting for the people beside you, and they're counting on you to bring them home. Sora never really went home. She had tried, but after 2 weeks on Earth, she found herself requesting reassignment to the Fleet Medical Service. Too many wounded still needed care. Too many medical teams still needed training. The galaxy had become her home, and the crews she served with had become her family. Joined the Galactic Council's Strategic Planning Committee, working to ensure the galaxy never forgot the lessons learned in blood. He taught that preparation for war preserved peace, that adaptability mattered more than perfection, and that the best weapon any civilization possessed was the courage of those who wielded it. Commander Wu, promoted to Admiral, took command of the rebuilt Indomitable as flagship of the combined defense fleet. On quiet nights, he stood in the observation deck and thought about everyone they had lost and everything they had gained. The wise ones had known that saviors would come, and they had come, not as gods or angels, but as warriors who understood that true strength wasn't about superior weapons or advanced technology. It was about standing together in the darkness, protecting those beside you, and refusing to let the light go out. The prophecy had spoken of beings touched by struggle, forged in conflict, but pure in their purpose to protect others. In the end, every species in the Allied fleet had become those beings. The galaxy had learned to fight, learned to sacrifice, and learned that the bonds forged in war could become the foundation for lasting peace. The Devourer was gone, but its legacy remained, not in destruction and fear, but in the unity it had forced upon species that had forgotten how to stand together. They would face new threats eventually, but they would face them as the prophecy had promised, as saviors who understood that the price of peace was eternal vigilance and the willingness to fight for something greater than themselves. Admiral Wu looked out at the stars and smiled. The wise ones had been right after all. The saviors had come from an unknown world. They just hadn't expected the warriors of Earth to teach the entire galaxy how to become saviors too.